Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 449 provides a rule for the consideration of H.R. 3457, the Justice for Victims of Iranian Terrorism Act, and the conference report to accompany H.R. 1735, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2016. Mr. Speaker, these two bills are directly related to one of the most important functions of Congress, which is to provide for the national security of our country. For 53 straight years, Congress has come together in a bipartisan fashion to pass a National Defense Authorization Act to ensure that our military men and women have the resources and the policies they need to do their job. Even in an era of deep partisanship in Congress, we have still been able to keep the tradition alive and pass each year. This rule would allow us to keep that tradition alive. The NDAA process has been a great example of following regular order and doing congressional business the way it is supposed to be done. In both the House and the Senate, the respective Armed Services Committees held multiple hearings and markups that allowed all members to have a role in the process. Here in the House, the NDAA came up for a vote on the floor with a record number of amendments, 135 to be exact. It passed with bipartisan support by a vote of 269 to 151. The Senate followed a very similar process and was able to approve their version of the bill by a vote of 71 to 25, a veto-proof majority. Since our bills were different, the last few months have been spent in a conference committee to iron out the differences. The bill doesn't include everything I would like, but it's the true definition of a bipartisan collaborative work product. This NDAA is a textbook example of how Congress should work. Despite all of that, I am shocked to learn that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not supporting this critical legislation. Even worse, the President has threatened to veto this bill. Mr. Speaker, let's take a quick look at what's going on in the world today. North Korea is trying to develop an ability to deliver a nuclear warhead to our allies in South Korea and to other places. China is building new islands in the Western Pacific and daring America to come into what they now claim as their new sea space and airspace. Russia has pushed into the Crimea, is consolidating its gains in the Donbass. Iran has just now been given the ability to get a nuclear weapon. ISIS and other terrorist groups are running in the area that used to be Syria and Iraq and Yemen and Libya. And now we have Russia coming into that same area in Syria and using their jets for military purposes and daring us to get in those skies with them. In the middle of all of this, we should be having a bipartisan, unified front to tell the world, to tell our adversaries, to tell our allies, and to tell our servicemen and women that we're united. There is no Republican, there is no Democrat when it comes to the defense policy of this country. Instead, we're going to have a debate not about the defense policy of our country, but about whether we're going to fund other functions of government, whether we're going to fund the IRS at a high level that the President wants, whether we're going to fund the Environmental Protection Agency that's attacking businesses across this country. We're going to talk about all those domestic issues and not talk about the defense of the country at this critical juncture. If there ever was a time when we should continue that tradition of standing together, it would be today. And for our President, our Commander-in-Chief, to threaten to veto this bipartisan bill is simply beyond belief. Now, I expect my friend from Colorado will argue that they oppose this bill because we should be spending more money on non-defense programs. And that is a debate worth having. But this is not the time for that debate. There's nothing more important for us to do today than to make sure that we're standing tall and standing unified for the defense of our country. And we should never, ever use the military as a pawn in some political game to increase controversial non-defense spending. Today's debate should be about providing for our nation's military women and their families. My colleagues and the President will reconsider their objections. This rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 3457, the Justice for Victims of Iranian Terrorism Act. A lot has been said on this floor recently about the threat and dangers posed to the United States and our allies by the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't want to rehash that debate, but I do think it is important to remember that Iran is the top state sponsor of terrorism on the globe. Over the past 15 years, more than 80 judgments have been handed down against Iran under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act exception for state sponsors of terrorism. These judgments add up to over $43.5 billion in unpaid damages. This straightforward bill would simply require Iran to pay each of these federal court judgments before the President can lift, waive, or suspend any sanctions currently in place against Iran. Let me briefly highlight a few examples of these judgments. In 1985, a Navy petty officer named Robert Stetham was killed during the hijacking of TWA Flight 847. Hezbollah, an Iranian-financed terrorist organization, was found responsible for the hijacking, and his family is now owed $329 million, and that's in a federal court judgment. My friend from Colorado might be particularly interested in this one. Thomas Sutherland, a teacher at Colorado State University for 26 years, was the former dean of agriculture at the American University of Beirut. He was kidnapped on June 9, 1985, after Iran directed terrorists to kidnap Americans in Lebanon. He was held in prison until November 18, 1991. His judgment is for $323.5 million. Or there is the story of Alan Beer, an American living in Israel, who was tragically killed after the Iranian-backed terrorist organization Hamas blew up a bus in Jerusalem. There is a $300 million judgment against Iran for Alan's death. These are just a few stories of Americans who've been tragically injured, killed, tortured, and kidnapped by Iranian-sponsored terrorist organizations. I simply can't understand why some of my colleagues and the President won't support this bill. This shouldn't be a partisan debate. American courts have already ruled that Iran owes money to these individuals and their families, citizens of the United States. So why is it controversial to require that these payments are made before rewarding Iran with billions of dollars in sanctions relief? This bill is really pretty simple to me. You can either stand with American citizens or you can stand with the Islamic Republic of Iran. You can stand with the Ayatollah or the families of service members who were killed by Iran-backed terrorists. To me, this is an obvious choice. So, Mr. Speaker, both of these bills are more than deserving of broad bipartisan support, and I hope that they receive just that. So I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I